While many expect Africa's future to be shaped by its aging leaders, a new generation is rising, defying expectations and transforming the continent's political landscape right now. Recent data reveals a striking contrast. The median age in Africa is just 19, yet the average age of those in power is 64. This is not just a statistic, it marks the world's most extreme generational divide in governance, fueling a continent-wide struggle for control and legitimacy. To understand the stakes, we need to look at the heart of this conflict, the generational gap. Across Africa, the faces of power have barely changed in decades. Presidents, ministers, and party bosses, many of whom came of age during the Cold War, still dominate the political scene. Their worldview was shaped by analog media, state-controlled narratives, and a system of patronage that rewards loyalty over innovation. In stark contrast, the majority of Africans have grown up in a world defined by smartphones, instant messaging, and a constant stream of global information. For them, the old ways feel not just outdated but actively hostile to their aspirations. This divide is about more than age. It is psychological, technological, and economic. The older elite governs through methods that prioritize secrecy, hierarchy, and control. They rely on national broadcasters, tightly regulated newspapers, and networks of personal loyalty. Meanwhile, the youth demand transparency, accountability, and rapid change. They see the chronic issues of unemployment and corruption not as unfortunate realities, but as direct consequences of a system that refuses to adapt. According to the African Union, Africa has the highest youth unemployment rate in the world, with tens of millions classified as NEETs, or not in education, employment, or training. For these young people, politics is not an abstract game. It is a daily struggle for dignity and survival. The source of their anger is clear. They watch as their leaders accumulate wealth and privilege, often at the expense of public services and future opportunities. Campaign finance, fueled by opaque donations and contributions, becomes a symbol of this inequality. The young generation sees the wealth and opportunities that their aging leaders have monopolized, and they are no longer willing to wait their turn. But what truly sets this generation apart is their mastery of digital tools. In the past, political organizing in Africa was often limited by geography and surveillance. Meetings had to be held in secret, messages passed by word of mouth, and protests could be easily contained by security forces. Today, that has changed. Platforms like TikTok, X, and encrypted messaging apps have become the new battlegrounds for political power. These tools allow young activists to organize rapidly, coordinate across borders, and evade traditional forms of repression. The power of these platforms is not theoretical, it is already reshaping the continent. Consider the recent events in Kenya, where a proposed tax hike sparked a wave of protests unlike anything the country had seen before. Within hours, young Kenyans mobilized online, using viral hashtags, live streams, and group chats to coordinate demonstrations in dozens of cities. The movement was decentralized, unpredictable, and impossible to suppress through conventional means. As the protests grew, the government attempted to respond with force and intimidation. But the digital momentum was unstoppable. Eventually, faced with overwhelming public pressure, the government was forced to reverse its decision. This was not just a victory for Kenyan youth, it was a signal to the entire continent. The old playbook of state control and top-down messaging no longer works when millions can organize at the speed of a trending tweet. Observers note that similar tactics have been used in Nigeria, Sudan, and South Africa, where digital activism has amplified demands for justice, transparency, and reform. Let's look more closely at Nigeria's #endsars movement, which erupted in 2020. What began as a protest against police brutality quickly evolved into a nationwide call for accountability and systemic reform. Young Nigerians used social media to share evidence of abuses, coordinate peaceful demonstrations, and crowdfund resources. The movement's decentralized structure made it difficult to suppress, even as authorities attempted to shut down the internet and intimidate organizers. According to reports from the BBC and Amnesty International, the government's heavy-handed response only fueled greater outrage, drawing international attention and solidarity from the Nigerian diaspora. In Sudan, the 2019 uprising that led to the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir was also driven by youth and digital mobilization. Young Sudanese, many of them women, used Facebook and WhatsApp to organize sit-ins and document abuses. Despite internet blackouts and violent crackdowns, the movement persisted, eventually forcing a transition to a civilian-led government. The United Nations has highlighted Sudan's youth as a driving force for change, noting their resilience in the face of repression. These examples reveal a pattern. Digital platforms have become the engine of a youth-led political transformation, enabling rapid mobilization and amplifying voices that were once marginalized. Yet, regimes have not stood idly by. In response to this new threat, many governments have attempted to shut down the internet or block access to social media during periods of unrest. According to Access Now, Africa leads the world in government-ordered internet shutdowns, with dozens of incidents recorded in recent years. Yet these countermeasures have often failed or even backfired. Young Africans have become adept at using VPNs and alternative platforms to bypass censorship. In some cases, internet shutdowns have only inflamed public anger, transforming local grievances into national or even international movements. Reports indicate that attempts to silence digital dissent frequently result in greater mobilization, as people find new ways to connect and share information. This tactical shift has profound consequences. What begins as protest can quickly escalate into something much larger. In recent years, the Sahel region has witnessed a wave of military coups, toppling governments in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. While each case has its own complexities, a common thread runs through them: widespread frustration among young people who feel excluded from political and economic life. In these countries, military leaders have gained popular support not just because they promise security, but because they are seen as agents of generational change. They present themselves as the antidote to an old, corrupt elite that has failed to deliver on the promises of independence. This is not to say that coups are a solution. Far from it. But the reality is that, in the eyes of many young Africans, the status quo is no longer acceptable. The military's appeal lies in its ability to clear out entrenched interests and reset the political system. Whether this leads to genuine reform or simply replaces one form of authoritarianism with another remains an open question. What is clear is that the generational war for political control is now the defining feature of African governance. The implications of this shift extend far beyond the continent. For decades, Western governments and China have relied on relationships with familiar, aging strongmen to advance their interests in Africa. These alliances were built on stability, predictability, and mutual benefit. But as the youth bulge transforms the political landscape, these old certainties are being upended. Long-term political stability is now contingent on the approval and engagement of digitally organized youth. No foreign power can afford to ignore this new reality. Recent data from the United Nations projects that Africa's population will double by 2050, with young people making up the vast majority. This demographic trend is both a challenge and an opportunity. If harnessed effectively, it could drive unprecedented economic growth, innovation, and social progress. But if ignored, it risks fueling further unrest, migration, and instability. As we look to the future, the central question is not whether generational turnover will happen, but how. Will the transition be chaotic, marked by more coups and violent upheaval? Or will it be constructive, driven by youth-led electoral reforms and new models of governance? The answer will depend on the choices made by leaders, both old and young, in the coming years. To understand the scale of this transformation, it is helpful to look back at the historical roots of Africa's political systems. Many of today's leaders came to power in the aftermath of colonial rule, inheriting institutions designed for control rather than participation. Over time, these systems became increasingly rigid, prioritizing stability over responsiveness. The result is a continent where the average citizen is decades younger than those who govern them, a recipe for tension and conflict. Yet history also shows that generational change is inevitable. In every society, new ideas and energies eventually reshape the political order. What makes Africa's situation unique is the speed and scale of the shift. Never before has such a large, connected, and ambitious generation come of age at the same time. The tools at their disposal, digital platforms, global networks, and instant communication, give them unprecedented power to organize, mobilize, and demand change. This power is not limited to protest. Across the continent, young entrepreneurs, artists, and activists are building new institutions from the ground up. They are launching startups, creating media platforms, and forming political movements that challenge the old ways of doing business. In countries like Ghana, Senegal, and Rwanda, youth-led initiatives are driving innovation in technology, education, and governance. These efforts are not always headline-grabbing, but they are quietly reshaping the fabric of society. At the same time, the risks are real. High unemployment, limited access to education, and persistent inequality create fertile ground for frustration and radicalization. In some cases, digital tools have been used to spread misinformation, incite violence, or undermine trust in democratic institutions. The challenge for Africa's youth is to harness their power for constructive change, rather than destructive confrontation. This is where the role of digital platforms becomes even more critical. Unlike traditional media, which can be controlled or censored, social media offers a space for genuine dialogue and debate. It allows young people to share their experiences, organize around common goals, and hold leaders accountable in real time. The Kenya tax uprising is a powerful example of how digital activism can translate into tangible political outcomes. But it is also a reminder that technology is only a tool. The real driver of change is the collective will of millions of young Africans. Observers note that the next phase of Africa's political evolution will be defined by the ability of institutions to adapt to this new reality. Governments that embrace transparency, accountability, and youth participation are more likely to enjoy stability and legitimacy. Those that resist change risk being swept aside by the tide of generational renewal. The international community also faces a choice. Will it continue to prioritize short-term stability over long-term reform? Or will it support the aspirations of Africa's youth, investing in education, technology, and inclusive governance? The answer will have profound implications not just for Africa, but for the world as a whole. As we reach the midpoint of this exploration, it is worth pausing to reflect. If you find these insights valuable, consider sharing this video so that more people can engage with the realities shaping Africa's future. Your support helps ensure that these critical conversations reach a wider audience. Returning to the narrative, let us examine the regional variations in this generational struggle. In North Africa, the memory of the Arab Spring still looms large. A decade ago, young people in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya used social media to topple long-standing regimes. While the outcomes have been mixed, the lesson is clear: digital tools can disrupt even the most entrenched systems. In West Africa, the recent coups in Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso reflect a different dynamic, one where military intervention is seen as a shortcut to generational change. In East Africa, movements like Uganda's People Power and Ethiopia's youth-driven protests show that electoral politics can also be a vehicle for transformation. Yet across all these regions, the underlying forces are the same. A young, connected population demands a seat at the table. They are no longer content to be passive observers of their own future. Instead, they are insisting on a new social contract, one that reflects their values, aspirations, and realities. This demand for change is not limited to politics. It extends to culture, economics, and identity. Young Africans are redefining what it means to be modern, blending tradition with innovation in ways that challenge stereotypes and defy expectations. They are creating music, fashion, and art that resonates far beyond the continent's borders. They are building businesses that solve local problems and compete on the global stage. In doing so, they are asserting their agency and shaping the narrative of Africa's future. But the path forward is uncertain. The forces of resistance are powerful and the risks of backlash are real. In some countries, governments have responded to youth activism with repression, censorship, and violence. In others, old elites have co-opted digital tools, using them to spread propaganda or manipulate public opinion. The struggle for control is ongoing, and the outcome is far from predetermined. To deepen our understanding, it is important to recognize the diversity within Africa's youth movements. Rural youth, often overlooked in discussions of digital activism, are increasingly finding ways to participate. In Ethiopia, for example, rural youth have used community radio and mobile messaging to coordinate local protests and share information, even in areas with limited internet access. In Senegal, youth in both urban and rural areas joined forces to protest against constitutional changes, demonstrating that the desire for generational change transcends geography. Gender dynamics also play a crucial role. Women have been at the forefront of many youth-led movements, from Sudan's sit-ins to Nigeria's #endsars protests. Their participation challenges traditional gender roles and brings new perspectives to the struggle for political and social reform. According to UN Women, African youth movements are increasingly recognizing the importance of gender inclusion, with women taking on leadership roles and advocating for issues such as reproductive rights and gender-based violence. Diaspora networks add another layer of complexity. Young Africans living abroad have become powerful allies, using their resources and connections to support movements back home. They amplify local struggles on the global stage, raise funds, and provide technical expertise. During the #endsars protests, for example, the Nigerian diaspora in the United States and Europe played a key role in drawing international attention and pressuring foreign governments to speak out. Economically, the generational divide is stark. Youth unemployment remains a persistent challenge, with the International Labour Organization estimating that more than 60% of Africa's unemployed are young people. This economic exclusion fuels frustration and makes the promise of change even more urgent. Yet, it also drives innovation. Across the continent, young people are turning to entrepreneurship, creating jobs for themselves and others in the absence of formal opportunities. In Rwanda, government-backed youth entrepreneurship programs have helped launch thousands of small businesses, while in Ghana, tech hubs are nurturing a new generation of innovators. The impact of these shifts is felt not just within individual countries, but across the continent. As youth-led movements gain momentum, they inspire similar actions elsewhere, creating a ripple effect that challenges entrenched power structures. The African Union has acknowledged the importance of youth engagement, launching initiatives to promote youth participation in governance and peace-building. However, implementation remains uneven, and many young people remain skeptical of top-down efforts that do not address their core concerns. As we consider the future, several scenarios emerge. In the best case, African societies embrace the energy and creativity of their youth, channeling it into constructive reforms and inclusive institutions. This would require a fundamental shift in how power is distributed, with greater emphasis on participation, accountability, and innovation. In the worst case, resistance to change leads to more coups, instability, and cycles of repression. The reality will likely fall somewhere in between, shaped by the choices of leaders, the resilience of institutions, and the determination of young people to claim their place in history. The generational war for political control in Africa is not just a story of conflict, it is a story of possibility. It is a reminder that the future is not predetermined, but shaped by the actions and aspirations of those who dare to imagine something better. The average 19-year-old African is now the most powerful political force on the continent, armed not with weapons, but with ideas, networks, and an unshakable belief in their right to be heard. As the world watches, the question remains, will Africa's leaders rise to the challenge, or will they be swept aside by the tide of generational change? The answer will determine not just the fate of individual countries, but the trajectory of the entire continent. So, what do you see as the strongest force shaping Africa's future? Sovereignty, accountability, or something else? Share your view below and join the conversation about the continent's next chapter.